Hi, my name is Kathleen Richardson and I'm the founder of the campaign against porn robots. Well, you probably remember it as the campaign against sex robots, but we've recently changed our name. And more on that, if you want to find out why we've changed our name, you can go to our Twitter or you can look at our YouTube channel. So what we've decided to do at the campaign against porn robots is start to have conversations with radical feminists, women who are concerned about what's going on in the world today with these issues around sex, sexuality, technology. And we've created the Feminist Ethical Dialogues. And it is my great pleasure today to welcome Genevieve Cluck to episode 2 of the Feminist Ethical Dialogues. And we're going to be discussing Porndolls and the dollification of women and girls. Now, clearly, dolls have an important place in human culture. So from life as talismans, where people would use dolls kind of as a version, as a miniature person, which they could then use a magic spell to kind of inflict harm on somebody else, to the kind of dolls that we get today, the pornography dolls that are circulating more widely in our culture. And the reason why the dolls issue is interesting is because the dolls are kind of the bodies. The pornographic dolls are the bodies in which people are adding in technology or thinking about how they could elaborate these pornographic dolls to make them technological. So on that note, dolls are really important, and we're going to be discussing how they play a role in today's world and how they're impacting on women and girls. So Genevieve, I'm just going to do a quick introduction to you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So you're a feminist writer and essayist who has contributed to Feminist Current and Spinning and Weaving Radical Feminism for the 21st Century. She hosts the amazing podcast, Women's Voices, which features interviews, recorded excerpts from feminist texts and news updates and discussion. She's also written as a guest contributor for Graham Linnen's blog, and she's covered a range of topics. I mean, I think, so you have an amazing Twitter feed and you produce so much content. So I would advise everyone to go and look you up. And at the end of the video, I'll make sure all the links to your blog and your Twitter are highlighted. So in recent months, her work has largely focused on the role of female objectification in gender ideology. And maybe in the future, you can come back and we can talk more about that one as well. So over to you. I believe you've got a presentation for us. So before you share the presentation, maybe you could tell us a bit about who you are and what you do and your blog and your site.
Well, I am a feminist. I don't really have any fancy academic credentials. I'm just a feminist who's interested in what's going on now, and especially current events that have to do with women and women's rights. So for a few years, I think actually like 3 or 4 years now, I've just been sort of looking at news articles, sharing them, commenting on them on social media. And recently I just decided, I really need to do something to document this and to be able to have discussions about it in a way that's a bit less fleeting. So something that's more tangible or lasting than simply, social media posts, basically. So I started my Substack this year. So it's my name, Genevieve Cluck, .substack.com, which is where I do some commentary, writing about current events. And also I have my Twitter feed, which is at Women Read Women. But kind of looking at the modern trends is what really has led me down to this kind of path of questioning the impact of pornography on things such as gender ideology, on women's sense of selfhood, on what it means to be a woman in terms of the proliferation of these types of images on social media, through pornography, and so on. So what I want to look at today is kind of related to that. And I have a lot of different points. And I just want to say that I'm going to be talking briefly about what I think is actually a much, much more complex and wide-reaching problem. Like, I think these dolls are related very much to pornography and social media. I think there's just a general trend that impacts many different sectors of society, particularly in how women and girls are viewed. So with that said, I'm just going to jump into it.
Great. And while you're presenting, I'm just going to turn my camera off and my sound off, but I'll be here in the background listening.
Okay, so to begin with, the question, how did children's dolls turn into men's playthings? And by this, it's meant the sex dolls, or the kinds of proliferation of dolls for sexual purposes. And I want to point out, first of all, that there's nothing really inherently negative about dolls in themselves. In psychology, the theory of mind refers to the mental capacity to understand other people and their behavior by ascribing mental states to them. And dolls can be useful for developing children's social and emotional skills, and empathy in particular. So it's not quite the doll itself that's the problem, but sort of what is projected onto the doll or how they are used in society. In particular, gender stereotypes are a big problem here. Young boys and teens are taught that exhibiting so-called feminine traits is wrong, embarrassing, and means that they are weak or that they aren't real men. So they're frequently punished for displaying any kind of feminine behaviors, while exhibiting traits like aggression and emotional detachment are increasingly rewarded. In order to combat this, a few years ago, a woman tried to encourage boys to play with dolls in the way that girls are encouraged to, in ways that kind of mimic nurturing or parental behaviors. So Laurel Wider had developed these dolls because her son came home from preschool saying that his teacher told him that he couldn't cry, or that boys were not supposed to cry. And she had discovered that other boys in his class were playing with their sister's dolls in secret out of fear of being mocked. However, this is representative, I think, of a wider systemic problem where gender stereotypes around children's toys, behavior, and the marketing to children has increased over the past 2 to 3 decades. There is some research about this. The Atlantic published a comprehensive piece detailing some research about this a few years ago. So the children of this generation, specifically in the past couple of decades, have grown into young adulthood now. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that gender identity ideology is on the rise. This marketing push and the increased gender stereotypes is increasing at exactly the same time that we're getting this idea that a boy who likes something feminine must therefore actually be a girl trapped in the wrong body. And starting at around the beginning of 2000, these Bratz dolls appeared where they're just highly sexualized. We know that Barbie dolls are sexualized to begin with, and you can actually sort of see a trajectory of them becoming more and more pornified as time goes on. But the Bratz dolls that appeared in 2001 were very representative of what a cosmetically enhanced porn star might look like or resemble. This image here that I'm showing you is of a mother who decided to start removing the makeup from these dolls and turning them into more realistic versions of girls. And so correlated with the increasing sexualization of children's toys, the increased gender stereotypes, the increased pornification in society, we are starting to see these child sex abuse dolls appearing. And this particular image is from Etsy, where customizable child sex abuse dolls were available. Caitlin Roper, who works for Collective Shout, actually pointed this out and was able to have it removed from the website. But they are increasing not only on Etsy, they have been appearing in countries such as Australia, but also in Japan. There's actually a factory in Japan which creates these types of materials. And this is another image from Etsy, again, showing the extreme pornification of these children with these dolls. So why is it that men are turning to dolls or objects that can't speak back, protest, or think for themselves? And what's happening to male sexuality? Well, I have here a list of things. I just think it's very complicated. It's not so simple as to say, you know, that this is sexism. Of course it's sexism, but there's a lot of factors that are contributing to this, such as increased interaction with devices. So our own technological devices are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and we're interacting with them more and more. Especially we've seen this happening with COVID and the need to stay at home or quarantine. And as a result, there's decreased direct interaction with each other. At the same time, concurrently, we have the promotion of a very severe BDSM culture that's being normalized. This again is correlated to the normalization of streaming pornography, the severe nature of the BDSM that's being promoted and normalized now, including things such as choking, or even just within fashion trends, incorporating BDSM culture. And the definition of a fetish is basically, there are a few ways of looking at this, but for sexual purposes, a fetish is something that comes between intimacy, so a projection of sexuality onto an object. So in a way, this is something that we're kind of doing constantly now with our devices. We have a device between us and another person. And so the conduit device kind of becomes what our brain is associating with as that person. And so I think that this could possibly lead to projecting other emotions onto devices, including sexual fantasies, aggression, and so on. And not to mention the consumption of pornography, which happens through these devices as well. And excuse me, coming up on the horizon, we have deepfakes. And deepfake is a portmanteau of deep learning and fake. This started to appear online around 2017. It is the technological process of taking the image of a real woman's face and superimposing it onto hardcore pornography. There's a lot of things to be said about this, but in terms of what I'm talking about today, I think this just mirrors a growing trend in like just decombobulating or breaking down, splintering women's bodies and sort of rearranging them to one's own fashion or desire or tastes. And coming very soon, we will be seeing VR pornography increasingly normalized. These I find to be very troubling developments, and I believe that, you know, the work that we do as feminists is we need to get ahead of this. We need to know that this is coming. We need to prepare for it. So how are these porn dolls, and as well as the objectification of women and girls, shaping women's sense of self and physical appearance? This is an Instagram influencer who has done makeup on herself to resemble a Bratz doll. So this, even though she no longer looks real or human, that is a real woman mimicking the doll. And this is a woman in Australia who has spent $43,000 on plastic surgery to resemble a Barbie doll. The article, again, they tend to portray these types of things as though they are heartwarming or positive. I mean, you hardly ever see any real in-depth analysis or criticism of what's going on here when you look at these news stories. But anyway, she kind of explains here that she spent the $10,000 that her parents had saved for her during childhood to pay for these surgeries. And then she got an Instagram following as a result of this, which is very common. Women will even seek out getting plastic surgery for the explicit benefit of getting followers on social media. And her surgeries resemble this trend that we're seeing more and more that's called bimbofication, which is the purchasing of these plastic surgeries that I have just showed you, the incredibly unrealistic enhancement of breasts or lips or so on, which is a very worrying trend, I think. And this article from 2020, so very recently, talking about it, describes how this kind of movement is centered on not thinking. It does sort of present it as maybe a possible reaction to some of the world's problems that are going on right now, perhaps a reaction to the pandemic or climate change, the perhaps desire to immerse oneself in a total and complete fiction in order to not feel anxiety about the way that the world is, things that are going on in the world right now. I think that there's a lot more going on to it than that, even because women are being so objectified and reduced to pieces and parts and sexualized objects that it's not quite simply enough to limit this to a trauma reaction to the events of the world at the moment. So self-objectification, or the digital dollification on social media, you have something called Snapchat dysmorphia, which is young women seeking out plastic surgery in order to resemble filters, their face filters through Snapchat or Instagram. There's a thing called Instagram face, which refers to a very specific type of face that has become desirable, specifically the hyperinflated lips, the small nose, things like this. And there's a lot of these makeup tutorials that are on social media, on Instagram, YouTube. Women are finding that they can actually earn money from becoming an influencer. So they'll end up, kind of marketing for makeup companies. And I think that this leads to increased self-rumination. Rumination meaning, kind of in your own headspace. It's not a place where, it's not a kind of headspace where you're very empathetic of others. It's a bit, I don't like to use the word narcissist because I think that encompasses a lot of other things as well, but it has sort of a effect of cutting oneself off from other people. And then along with this, you might have decreased confidence, feelings of self-worth. Girls, for example, who feel that they don't resemble some of their influencers, their favorite influencers, they might feel that there's something wrong with them, that they're not worthy of attention or love. And we're also seeing a rise in depression and suicide attempts in younger girls, particularly those who spend more time on social media. This is from research that was published this year about how teenage girls, when they spend more time glued into Instagram and TikTok and so on, where this dollification is happening, then their risk for suicide increases. And this was a 10-year study that found these results. They notably did not find the same results for boys. So how can we encourage women to reject this objectification or dollification? One example of rejection of these beauty standards is coming from South Korea, which is the feminists there are doing brilliant work to reject it. It's called the tall corset movement, or take off the corset. And South Korea is known as the capital of the plastic surgery industry in Asia. It's got this booming market, or it did before the pandemic anyhow, of tourists flooding into the capital to get cheap plastic surgery. Even girls in Korea were being gifted with plastic surgery as presents for graduating high school. They might, for example, get their eyelids corrected or things like this. And it had become a kind of standard for hiring, actually. So in Korea, it's customary to place a photograph with your application. And so women were finding that they were feeling much more pressure to get plastic surgery just in order to get a job. This is a quote from a New York Times article discussing the movement. And it quotes this young woman who is anonymous, so it's just her last name here, who says, "Keep your sorrow brief and your anger long. That anger will be your revolution and your beginning. The harsher the backlash, the greater your relief will be." This is an image of an advertisement for plastic surgery in South Korea. They are all over subways, metro stations. Some of them might say things like suggesting that you won't be able to find love unless you undergo plastic surgery. And a South Korean YouTube star, she was a makeup tutorial specialist, and she joined the Take Off the Corset movement when she came out against these unrealistic beauty standards, the makeup industry, the beauty industry. She received death threats. A professor at the Institute of Body and Culture at Konkuk University, Yoon Kim Ji-young, argues that in South Korea, women are up against a multi-billion-dollar industrial complex, including cosmetics, plastic surgery, and entertainment, which sends women mutually reinforcing messages. This huge mechanism unilaterally defines the ideal body image for young women, as well as the direction and size of their dreams, she says. So as a result, many young women aspire to become YouTube makeup coaches. Yoon Kim adds that not until they have escaped the corset do many women realize that they've been taught to blame themselves for the discrimination they encounter and to feel that it's their own fault for not being young, skinny, or pretty enough. A 2017 poll found that nearly 40% of respondents in Korea experienced discrimination based on their appearance when applying for jobs. Applicants are commonly asked for photos as well as information about their height and weight. The constant feeling of obsession, self-hatred, and fatigue in this competitive society, she says, robs us of the energy to address its fundamental structural inequality. Okay, so this question is one that I think I could probably just talk about for an hour or something. And I've tried to just kind of make it a bit more succinct. So some of these these two examples I have are a bit extreme, but there's much more going on than this. There are, for example, trans-identified males who are getting plastic surgery specifically to look like dolls themselves. This is not always the case. It is happening, but in general, the dollification of women, the objectification of women and girls is so saturated in society that even if they don't say that they're doing it to look like a doll, I mean, it's quite obvious that these plastic surgeries, that's the aim and that's the goal. You know, the attainable or the unattainable image of woman is what is being promoted here within gender ideology as, you know, the actual or the real woman, or really the woman that is actualized to to the becoming of the woman through these surgeries. And another example, 110,000 pounds to look like a human doll. There are several of these examples as well, not all of them quite so extreme. But ultimately what this is the commodification of identity and selfhood being rebranded as a product. So within these porn dolls, sex dolls, what have you, women and girls are now coming to replicate these projected fantasies of womanhood. And there's this ongoing push redefine women as fake, plastic, and constructed. And as the sex dolls are being made to resemble women, women are being made to resemble the dolls as well. And then men who succeed in resembling this pornified projection of women are then being told that they are actually women, and we're being told that they're actually women if they go through these types of surgeries. Of course, we know that these surgeries are incredibly harmful. I can't not mention that, because recently it's been found that breast implants cause a whole new type of cancer that they didn't know existed. There have been several lawsuits from women who have suffered from this new type of cancer as a result of the breast implants. So on the one hand, the popular culture mainstream narrative about gender ideology says that, you know, if a man goes through with these types of surgeries, then they're actually a woman. And on the other hand, you have women who are suffering crippling, life-threatening effects of these surgeries. So very important to notice the hypocrisy and the distinction there. And that's all that I have prepared for you today, Kathleen. And I wanted to leave some time open for questions that you might have, or comments. Or
Yeah, wow. You should really be an academic. That was extraordinary. I mean, you covered so many topics there. I've taken so many notes. So thank you for that. This is so important, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation today. So the first thing I just want to echo back to you is that feminists aren't against reproducing human-like forms in objects, right? We're not against statues or dolls. And I really liked your introduction at the beginning about how this could be beneficial in imparting social skills to young boys and young girls. And you also drew our attention to the way in which, if you like, there's sex inequality. So it begins very early on, and the kind of roles that males and females are expected to perform in society, you know, are kind of expressed through these toys in their lives. And all you have to do is type in girls' toys into Google, and you'll just get dolls, hoovers, cookery sets, and you type in boys' toys, and they'll get, you know, toys that are about adventure and exploration. And courage and all those kind of things. So we've got a really big problem on our hands. And actually, you know, I feel like we've gone backwards. So there was a point in the 70s where we said, right, we wanted to abolish these kind of sex role stereotypes. And we've ended up in a place where they're more entrenched than ever before with, as you said, these harmful consequences in terms of gender ideology, people being born in the wrong body. So that's all I just wanted to echo that actually the, you know, when we talk about objectification, feminist theory of objectification, it's not a theory that says we can't ever reproduce our image or representations of ourselves in the world. What it is, and I think what your presentation showed was what is being represented. What kind of idea of woman is being represented, and how is the market, if you like, the market and the pornography industry collaborating a lot with and partnering with tech firms and companies to create these very alienated versions of women, like of those images that you kind of showed. They were so alienated, you know, kind of removed from a kind of a sense of the female body and the female experience, because, you know, there isn't one female body, it's a range of bodies. But in the world, we seem to have narrowed it down to about 5 or 6 forms, probably even fewer than that, you know, this idealized pornographic female body. And that is what's being circulated. The first thing then I want to talk about is this extraordinary sexualization of children's toys like brats. And there was a toy recently, I've forgotten the name of it, that if you put it in water, it showed like streaming tears and fishnet stockings. So I think this is really important. Let's look around the children's issue for now before we move on to the adult men and then the women and girls. So what is going on with these sexualized dolls that are being used by girls? I mean, these are being used by 3, 4, 5-year-old girls.
Yeah, I wish I could say I knew exactly what was going on. I don't, but I do fear that the outcome is going to be quite severe. I mean, it's coming at young girls from every angle right now. You know, the toys that they play with, the media they consume, their classmates even, you know, like there's been recent research showing that boys as young as 11 are now looking at pornography. And in the UK recently, there was a big movement against porn within school, sexual harassment in school, and girls as young as I think even 13 or 14 saying that they had been asked for nude photographs from boys in their class. So as far as the toys are concerned, I feel that perhaps the effect on young girls will be to normalize this awful type of behavior, this dehumanizing and objectifying behavior, for them to just feel that it's completely normal. You know, a part of our ability to fight back as feminists is understanding when we're being violated. If we don't have that understanding that what's happening is wrong, then we don't even think to do anything about it. So if girls are being shown these hyper-sexualized images or made to empathize with or relate to them at such a young age, how will they ever come to know that sexual violations against them are wrong? I mean, obviously the implications here for child sexual abuse are huge. It's a type of grooming of children, whether it's intentional or not, that is the effect. And we really need to start calling that what it is, that these toys, these things like the Bratz dolls and so on, it is grooming children to accept their own dehumanization. And we really need to talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, I think the companies that are manufacturing these objects, um, you know, if you have a healthy sexuality, right, you do not produce objects of that are targeted at young girls, of them dressed in fishnet stockings, right? You just don't. It wouldn't even occur to you. So I actually think there's the fact that these objects exist and they're coming into our world and they're coming into our shops shows us there is something going on. There are the minds that are creating them are sexualizing children. And maybe what happens is along the way, there should be gatekeepers. There should be people who say, hang on a minute, this stops here. So maybe the designer designs the doll, but then maybe the company says, oh no, that doesn't fit right with our values. So we're not going to pursue that product. But you've got to think about all the links in a chain that are necessary in order for an idea to turn into an object that is sold in a shop. And that there's no one in between all those links who's actually raising questions, or maybe they are, but they're drowned out. There's always gatekeepers in every area. And we find out years later that someone did raise concerns, but they weren't listened to because they didn't have the power in a situation. So I'd like to think there are people raising those questions along the way. But even when they get to the shop, it's mothers that are buying these objects for their daughters. Perhaps, what's your view on that?
It's hard to say. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, that touches, fundamentally on a much deeper issue, actually, I think, about why women would support our own dehumanization. I mean, there's likely a lot of reasons for it. It's very complex, but I really can't. I can't even imagine if, I don't have children, but if I were a mother, there's no way I would be buying those things. So it's hard for me to kind of fathom. Perhaps maybe it's just so normalized that no one sees it as strange anymore. Particularly maybe with the younger generation, I guess, because we are seeing such an increase in normalizing plastic surgery, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, I do see like a strong responsibility among celebrities in this as well. The normalization of plastic surgery then kind of influences the pornification of all of us, of women, of girls, of children. They're all kind of linked, you know. So when someone you're meant to look up to as a girl, right, it is getting plastic surgery, is sexualizing themselves, objectifying themselves, then that's another way in which this is normalized, along with the toys and so on.
Yeah, I actually wonder if it does relate to the men's issue as well, because I guess what people think, and I get this a lot, that these are objects, they're not real, they're not, you know, the kind of modernists have constructed the world, and they said, right, there's the real world in which people are in, and then there's the fantasy world, which is totally unrelated to this world that we're in, and therefore perhaps the parents who buy these objects are thinking, you know, they've been brainwashed into thinking, oh, they're harmless objects, whereas in fact they are doing everything that you said. And I suppose you know, our work is trying to get that message out to more people, so parents think critically about what they're buying for their children. But the same issue about, you know, these adult dolls, they're not harming anyone. You know, what does it matter if these adult men purchase these dolls? It's better that they have a doll than whatever, you know, a person. And so how would you respond to that? How would you respond to that issue?
A couple of things, actually. Like, so it used to be understood that media impacted behavior and the way that we see the world. This was known, especially a lot of research that was being done when televisions were being invented. You know, there was a lot of work being done into that. So there's decades of research showing that media impacts our perceptions of reality. There are things, you know, such as mirror neurons, where when we see something happening on media, maybe we can understand that it's not real, but our brain can't. The part of our brain that operates without us realizing it is having an increasingly difficult time understanding what is real and what is not. I think that's coming to a head now. We have other issues related to that, including, you know, deepfakes, VR, and so on. It's just going to keep getting worse and worse. But something that I like to mention when people bring this up, so there tends to be this wish to portray these things as somehow preventing sexual crime, which I find baffling, because for starters, you wouldn't give a murderer a weapon to prevent him from murdering. You know, it's like rape is the only crime that is thought to be preventable through routine practice. So they have set up these industries, the sex trafficking industry, saying, you know, oh, if men have access to these women, they won't hurt other women, which again, research has shown that's not to be true. So why is it that this crime is the only one where people will say, well, if they have what they want, then they won't actually do it to women? It makes no sense. I mean, if anything, it trains them to dehumanize and then motivates violent behavior.
Yeah. Well, I think your media theory is really important, because at least in the past, the bulk of people's experiences were through face-to-face encounters. You know, they had to be in the world. You know, I'm from that generation where you used to play outdoors, for example. And young people today, they're spending inordinate amount of time online, and in fact the number is increasing. And there was a survey recently that found that I mean, you've got to think, we're social beings, right? We've survived for hundreds of thousands of years as modern humans because of our social interaction, and then within you know, a blink of an eye, we've got this technology which stops people from interacting with each other. And it's like you said, it has this whole host of other consequences, because then if you're not interacting with the person, you don't have to show them the same kind of empathy that you might have to do in real life. If you're interacting with someone online and they upset you, you can delete them or turn off a computer, whereas you might have to negotiate working with someone who is a difficult person, but you have to, that's challenging, but you develop skills then to how you can be with others in these complex situations, and so on and so on. And there was this survey that said that actually young people, this sample, that they preferred sending messages to each other than talking to each other. And I'm just thinking, well, where is this going? Because the online world is not, it's not an ethical space, right? It's a very harmful space. And what goes on inside of it actually interrupts people being human with each other, interrupts the empathy. So they're viewing more extreme imagery online. They're atomized so that they're viewing this on extreme imagery. They might be disconnected and have a very small social circle, which means that they might want to mimic some of the practices that they're seeing online. So self-harming, for example. Just on the self-harm, I read somewhere, because I've noticed it's when I was growing up, maybe girls did self-harm, but I didn't know of any. Whereas today, young girls, self-harming cutting, for example, seems to be really widespread. And the only place they can get this from is social media, right? This is primarily the place in which they're learning that cutting is a way to address a problem, and therefore learning how to do it. But what was interesting is that I looked into cutting, and it has associations in BDSM. And I was thinking to myself, is cutting really a BDSM practice that has kind of become mainstream? But the girls are doing it, but this is, people are getting off on it, right? People are getting sexually excited from all these girls scarring themselves and bleeding.
Sorry. Well, I just want to say, I just want to say, as a teenager, I cut myself actually as well, so I had learned it from a friend. How old was I? I was like 14 or something. This was way before social media. So I was doing it because a friend, and so that's this kind of, social contagion effect, which women and girls are much more prone to than men are for whatever reason. Maybe it's got to do with empathy. I'm not really sure, but I want to get to your point about the BDSM though, because this is something that I'm increasingly looking into. And every time I kind of look into it, I think I might have reached the end of it, but then it keeps going. It's like the transgender craze with children now seems to be something that is based in normalizing factors of BDSM as well. And I think that when you're talking about the cutting, I think my mind went there because I thought, wow, like in order to justify dangerous sexual practices, adults are normalizing it to the extent that children are being incorporated or becoming involved in it, which it means that, you can't really criticize the sexual aspect anymore because children are involved. So if you kind of bring up the sexual aspect, people might accuse you of sexualizing children, for example, which is quite brilliant, darkly brilliant, I think. But yeah, I do see the BDSM increasing as related to decreased intimacy, decreased empathy, decreased mutuality among people, with the desensitization that you described, calling for more and more extreme thrills or painful practices. And it used to be kind of the purview of, men who were addicted to pornography. But now it's just becoming so normalized. I mean, it's really quite worrying to me. And within all of that is the don't shame people kind of movement, right? Like whatever anyone does is okay. We're not meant to think about it critically at all. I think that one knock-on effect of what's going on here with the media, the objectification and everything like this is the silencing of critical thought, but also we are unlearning critical thinking. We are being actively discouraged from thinking critically about these things, and the choice rhetoric is being pushed more and more. And you know, how dare you criticize someone's choice if they freely made it, which just really allows for exploitation to move in there, especially, you know, corporate exploitation, just complete takeover of the self by the media, by external forces.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing about the self-harm. I'm probably older than you, but you're right. These things, I'm not saying these things didn't go on, but I guess, if, you know, I think you would agree that it is quite widespread among young women today. And even I've noticed, for example, self-harm being featured more in dramas. And I was watching a drama on a broadcast channel, and a woman went into the bathroom and was self-harming, and there was no context for it or distress. It wasn't like she was distressed and she did something in order to minimize distress. She looked quite relaxed, went into the bathroom, cut herself, the doorbell rang, you know, she put down a razor, and I just turned the TV program off, because certainly I think a lot of these pornographic ideas, the dehumanized ideas, are being circulated through dramas, just regular dramas, and they're becoming normalized through them. So when we get to the dolls, so we have this, you know, one of the reasons why I think they're porn dolls is because someone has gone into pornography and says, right, there's that woman, I want to copy and imitate that version of woman. And that version of woman has been created by men in the pornographic industry, because she had to be constructed as well with all the money and the surgery. You know, women in pornography have to have their labiaplasty and breast enhancements in order to conform to the pornographic ideal. They've taken that idea and they've created a doll version of it, and that's what they do. And you know, I think the fact that people see them as harmless objects, and if you criticize someone, you're being unkind, you know, or you're shaming someone. But actually what someone's doing is they're saying, look, I'm bringing my pornography out into the world, and if you say anything about it, you're the problem. So how do we address this issue? I mean, we could say, I don't care about kink shaming, but I think the bigger issue is the terms of the debate have been constructed by them. So we can't always respond on their terms, if you know what I mean. But how do you respond to this idea that you cannot question people's sexual fetishes?
I actually find laughter to be quite helpful.
Yeah.
It breaks up some of the tension. I mean, you just have to keep doing it. I don't really know what to say. Like, we have to keep talking about it. I mean, the impact on children at least should be a driving motivator to discuss what's going on. And parents need to know. Parents really need to know. I really wonder if most of the parents right now know what's available on even things like social media. I mean, children are seeing really awful things on just basic social media. You don't even have to go to porn sites anymore to see it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's increasing more and more. So awareness, we need to talk about it. When people do find out these things, they are, you know, disgusted and outraged, as they should be. And we really need to get ahead so that we're not always on the defensive. We need to know what the next thing is going to be, and we need to be prepared, because the law is not keeping up with the technology. It's simply too slow. And so we really must work towards developing counter technology. Recently, a woman in China discovered that she had her likeness had been used in deepfake pornography that was available on, I don't know, Pornhub maybe or something like this, and her friend alerted her about it. So she's now working to develop AI that can recognize when your face has been used across the internet. So a kind of facial recognition app that will help to kind of be defensively working against it. However, I mean, it's awful enough that we're at that point, right? Isn't
Yeah.
it? I mean,
it just never ends, does it? I mean, the way in which women can be harmed, how their rapes can be filmed and circulated online, and all this kind of adoration that women receive. So they, this, I guess this, I guess it's an externalized view of self, isn't it? It's not an internalized view of one. It's not kind of a sense of self that comes from your own experiences in the world, but other people's versions of you. And it's kind of like, well, their versions of you are unreal. So you can't, even if you did all these things, right, you've got all the surgeries, you can't ever be a doll because it's an object, right? It's outside of the scope of human experience. I really agree. Now, I know you're not an academic, but I am, and one of the things that, you know, the split off world is very important for academics. You know, one group of academics say the world is split off. There's no harm because it's all fantasy, and the virtual reality they would put in that category. And then there's another, the kind of cyborg queer theorists who say actually it's a flat ontology. So you know, if a man wants to have marry a doll, then that's great. You know, it doesn't make any difference if he marries a doll or a human being. It's all cool, man. And so academia is really driving a lot of these. They are being the community that is creating the frameworks, if you like, that rationalizes a lot of these processes that are going on. Do you have any comments on that? I mean, you should be someone, right, who's an academic or really in the public domain, sharing your ideas. But what do you think about academia today, and how it helps us to look at these problems?
well, I think academia is in part responsible for this, like you said, the push to say, you know, everything's okay, go with the flow, or I don't know how you would, you know, term it, to stop thinking critically, which I find baffling because academia is supposed to be the thing that is doing the critical thinking. I thought. I guess that's not the case anymore so much as it used to be. I mean, like when I was mentioning the research about media, I mean, that used to be a real concern. People were worried about the impact of, you know, watching television all of the time. And now I think part of the problem is that we're so inundated with media. I mean, we are just absolutely saturated. We have so many choices of things to watch, games to play, interactive devices, that it's also, that's another phenomenon that's causing like splintering of society, because nobody really has a common experience or common ground from which to relate to other people as well, because we're also immersed in these various different worlds that we're in, and that separates us even more. But perhaps the saturation of media is causing this inclination towards not criticizing anything. Maybe our brains are just simply overwhelmed with the amount of content that we're putting into them, that we are losing our space and time that we need to process what we're perceiving anymore. So maybe it's partially a subconscious phenomenon of kind of tuning out. I mean, the more that you're tuning in, you're tuning out. So I mean, that could be the case. I don't know. I would imagine there would probably have to be some kind of, you know, neurological research on to see if that's actually going on in the brain. But I just assume it makes common sense. You know, if you, the more time that you spend playing a video game, for example, this has been documented. You do kind of go into a sort of beta wave brain level to where you're not really that active. Your brain isn't that active anymore. You compare that to things, for example, like books. Books actually increase activation in the brain. So I think there's a massive, you know, kind of tuning out that's going on with the more that we consume. And maybe academia is reflecting that, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's driving it as well, because a lot of this, queer theory stuff, gender ideology came out of universities. And it became popular in universities, and it wasn't tried and tested in society. They never put the ideas to people in society and said, what do you think about this? But yeah, the internet, what do we do? So I'm going to bring things to a close. So I want to, clearly we care about our girls. What can we do? What should we be doing to make sure that this is not a road? These are not roads. There is another road for them to take. What would be your positive message?
I suppose more feminists getting out there on the internet to combat some of this, I guess. We know that the internet's not going away anytime soon. And unfortunately, it has become a very male-dominated kind of manosphere that cyberspace has. And yeah, that's not always to women's fault. I mean, women are being silenced, obviously, online in various ways, whether through threats or actual censorship. But I mean, we just need to keep having the conversations. There's so much noise right now, and we need to give girls kind of an option or an anchor, something to hold on to, something real. So I guess if you're able to, then having conversations, face to face, whether with friends or whatever, children, and so on, talking about media. I know that it's difficult sometimes to bring up these topics with your friends. Sometimes there's a tendency to want to just kind of hang out, have fun, not talk about some of the things going on right now. But I mean, if you bring it up, and I have brought it up with some people who are actually in the technology industry, and I find that people are very willing to kind of talk about it. I had brought up to someone in the tech industry about, for example, Telegram being used to proliferate child pornography. What can we do about that? And then it comes back to, sort of this argument that I think is very helpful, actually, because knowing that this argument exists, then we can talk about it and confront that, which is the, privacy element online, which I find has just gotten completely flipped, So, for example, Telegram, it's private, so it allows for abuses to happen. And so the privacy of the predators causes the victims to not have privacy. So we're doing it backwards in some ways, where our first instinct should be, protection, and then following that privacy. But I don't see that happening yet. But yeah, online privacy is a serious issue that needs to be discussed. Our ability to track child sexual exploitation through technology needs to be looked at.
Yeah, and just to echo some of those things. So I think what came across really clearly in your presentation was about this version of women does not come from women, right? It doesn't come from our experiences of being women in the world. And so when we're adopting it and copying and mimicking it, we're mimicking a very dehumanized version of ourselves. So don't do it, and I guess for me, I came to feminism quite late, because I had, I was involved in left-wing politics, and they were very anti-feminist and like pro-sex trade, and pornography was great. It was just women, wanting to have sex and have a camera crew there at the same time, all these things. So it was really weird. It was only in my 40s that I started reading around radical feminism. And I like to think that if I had access to these ideas earlier, then I could have had a different kind of experience, but you can't look back retrospectively. But one thing I've learned is that our messages that value girls, that prioritize them, are not the message that's out there in the world. So if people are watching this, set up your own YouTube channel, even if you only get a few followers. If we all got 100 followers and there were 1 million of us, that's a huge reach. Don't just think about these large audiences. Think about what you can share, what positive message you can share to girls to counter some of this stuff, and then build your reach, and then just keep proliferating it. So we keep proliferating our message so it gets out wider and wider and wider. And I guess that's why I do this, and why I wanted to do this, why I wanted to take these kind of conversations into this domain so we can start thinking about them. And I am going to develop a project on something, and I will be in touch with you, because I just think if there was a way to involve you in the work, that would be absolutely brilliant. But as they say on social media, videos should be kept short, because the attention span of young people and more older populations is very short. So I do want to keep talking, but I think we'll do it again at a later point. So I'm going to yeah.
There's just one thing I want to say that I had forgotten to say, actually, which is in all of this, when women self-objectify, when women ourselves do it and allow ourselves to be turned into a product and participate in it, we are actually allowing men to then appropriate our identity. They wouldn't be able to call themselves women by getting plastic surgery and so on if we refuse to comply with the pornified image that they say is us. So first of all, objectifying people allows them to be exploited altogether. It dehumanizes. That's the point. It's deliberate. And so by dehumanizing women in this pornified fashion, it allows for men then to turn women into a product and a commodity. So the idea that a man can become a woman if he buys things is ultimately the idea that womanhood is a product for sale. And so we need to get behind, saying no, normalizing no, and being against it. But I did want to finish on just a positive note, which is, I just really wanted to give credit to the South Korean feminists who are doing such great work rejecting this type of thing. And younger women, I've noticed, around like 18, 19-year-old social media accounts now popping up who are interested in this. Maybe they might say they're like baby rad femme or something like that, but I'm noticing more of them, and certainly on TikTok there are some as well. So I do think it is making a difference to have these public conversations. So thank you.
Yeah. And just to echo that as well, it would be great if we could have some South Korean feminist on at some point. That would be brilliant. And what's going on there, with their campaigns like Not Your Porn. And I think that's it. That is it, right? That's the measure. If you find, right, that your self-worth is decided by your proximity to pornography, right, which is what's going on. If the only way that you can have any standing in the world is turn yourself into pornography for men, then that this is why the anti-pornography message is so important, because pornography is not about women's humanity. It's not about loving women or being empathetic with women or acknowledging our fine and amazing attributes that we have as human beings. I mean, we're human beings, so we have bad attributes as well. But just that it's not about acknowledging as human beings. And I actually think the pornographic view of women is the most dominant view of women today in the world. And that's what we need to change as women, right? We are human beings, and that's what we've got to fight for every step of the way. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you. I will put this online and hope to catch up again with you soon. And thank you for all your amazing work and your extraordinary, contribution and critique of what's going on. Thank you.